who received his Ph.D. In clinical psych with a minor in political science and information and culture from Howard, his undergraduate and his master's degree from Fisk University, also in psychology and clinical psych. The native of Cincinnati, Ohio, member of St. John's number 3, Prince Hall affiliated. And we also know that he has been sought after as a speaker and consultant working with the Ministries of Education in the Caribbean and West Africa. Has a dynamic presentation style that you'll be acquainted with today. And this is partly what has garnered the attention of Taraji Henson, who he's working with her foundation. We have someone who's got some sound in the background. You can put your...
I muted him, don't worry about it. I got you, bro.
Okay, good, thank you. And so, you know, we are super excited today because even in the tremendous work that he's done in the past, working with social work scholar Boone Sheely, and engaged in the work of developing degree work, as we just heard, he's taken time out today in his busy schedule to be with us. I do want to share my screen for a moment, just so that you have the opportunity to be further acquainted with what we're going to be doing today. And so we know that today's lecture is entitled The Evolving Masonic Mind. And we know this is part of an inaugural lecture series that is being done by the Phylaxis Society of Ohio. If you are interested in joining this particular organization, you can do that. We make it really simple. You know, you're paying $25 dues. You can cash app it to the, you know, to the $, Maarifa Treasurer. We are the Maarifa Chapter. Maarifa is a very specific word, African word that from the, I believe it's from the Akan, that basically is referring to a profound insight, a profound experience that intersects with a sort of a spiritual revelation. So that is our name, and we are delighted to have this series today. This is the third in a 4-part series. You only see 3 on the screen. We have recently added an additional speaker to our series, Tahuti Evans, who will be speaking with us next month. But we are absolutely excited to have today before us an individual who, as I just read to you, his bio, has written extensively on Prince Hall Freemasonry. You can find more information on his website, mindonthematter.com. And you can also get access to his publications. It says alt around here at the top. That is absolutely false. This is all Jeff Menzise's work. You have 10 different areas here. You have 10 different book projects, 9 books, and one that is a series that's an Afrocentric heritage playing card series. And so I would encourage you to get access to his work. I've had a chance to read the first one listed there, Symbolically Speaking, and haven't made it around to all the other series for the volume 1, 2, and 3 for Masonic meditations, but that is on my to-do list. But certainly out of all of these books, you'll find some exciting reading that will help to engage your evolving Masonic mind. And so with no further ado, we'd like to welcome Brother Dr. Jeff Menzise for his lecture entitled The Evolving Masonic Mind. Please help me give him a round of applause.
All right, thank you so much, Brother Jackson, Brother Dr. Jackson. It's always my honor to be here. Salute, to the Maarifa Chapter of the Phylaxis Society of Ohio, doing big things, revolutionary, just even in the name itself, and I really respect and honor that. As mentioned, I am an actual fellow of the Phylaxis Society. I like to consider us as the actual fellows. We're like the special forces as far as going in and doing recon missions. We're going in and we're on intelligence missions. We're going in and grabbing information, and we're writing, we're publishing, we're trying to elevate Prince Hall Freemasonry overall. Because this is a continuation of the work that the founding 15 began in modern times. But they were actually continuing from the more ancient times. Just one point of correction, because I will not let this be out there without being corrected, because then, boy, they'd be ready to drag me. I'm not doing specific degree work for the consistory. I just want to make that is not what's happening. It's all good, Bob. I know. But what is happening is I've gotten the approval to develop an African rite. It's just like we have a Scottish rite, we have a York rite. I've got the thumbs up, to go ahead and develop the African rite, which is a series of degrees that are based on African spirituality and that are designed to be an initiatory process and experience that will literally, evolve the Masonic mind, will literally do what it is that we know we're doing, but do it from the African-centered lens, right? And I've been afforded the opportunity to experience Freemasonry from an African-centered perspective. One, because I was initiated into an African spiritual system prior to being initiated, passed, and raised as a Freemason, but then also having gone back after being initiated, passed, and raised, and actually being initiated into other African spiritual traditions. And so I've seen it on both ends, right? And so it's, in fact, one of my initiators in the EFA, he himself, is also Freemason. And so we were able to have various discussions from the African spiritual side of things, as well as from the Freemasonic side of things. And I maintain that it is to our greatest benefit to, if I said it once before, I was having a discussion a couple of weeks back. I said, and I stand by this, that I think that everybody who is initiated into Freemasonry should also take it upon themselves to be initiated into an African spiritual tradition. I just think that it's necessary, especially for those of us that are of African descent. And I say that because, to me, that is where our spiritual power lies. To me, that is where we are most empowered. And that's what, for me, that's what this is all about. It's about empowerment. It's about refinement. It's about growth, and it's about development. And I just think that when we travel in a Masonic sense, in the absence of that culturally specific method for refining ourselves, I think that we're leaving a lot of stuff on the table. If we was talking about business, we'd be leaving money on the table, right? And in this regard, we're leaving our power on the table. And if you look at through the whole process of enslavement and colonization and all the various aspects of that, what you will recognize was a gradual and very intentional stripping of our African identity from us, right? It's happened in almost every area of people activity that you could think of. And if I had to choose two areas that it happened the most in, it would be religion and it would be education. We've been prayed away from our African selves. We get the whole story of Moses, let my people go, wicked Pharaoh, holding God's chosen people captive. And, when we're told the story, we're told that wicked Pharaoh was this Egyptian Pharaoh, this Egyptian king who we automatically assume was some African dude. And then God's chosen people had to be some non-Africans that were being held captive that finally fled. My understanding, and it's backed by documentation. Sigmund Freud, he has a book called Moses and Monotheism that he published, and from my understanding, on his deathbed, and that it was intentionally done at the end of his life because he didn't want to have to face the consequences for releasing such information. When the information they released was that Moses himself was an African, right? And then the further in that line of thinking is the notion that then the people that were being held captive, were actually African people being held captive by a foreign invader. And so if you look at the story of Exodus from that light, and then you'll say, well, wait a minute now, because Moses, he was raised as an Egyptian prince and a priest. He was raised in all of the ways of Egypt, and it was good. That's what we're told. But when it's explained, this whole thing about Egypt, this whole thing about African spirituality, somehow or another, it's supposed to be something wicked. And I refuse to accept that. I haven't always been in the position to refuse to accept it. But as I've learned and as I've traveled and as I've grown and as I've refined myself, I come to understand whoa, that is perhaps the most important and valuable thing that we could be embracing if we're really serious about this growth and development and what we call making good men better, right? Because we're not, as Freemasons, good men becoming better for the sake of ourselves, and not even for the sake of the institution and the fraternity of Freemasonry, but we're doing that to be better for our families, right? And to be better for our communities and for society as a whole, and then for greater civilization and actually for the entire planet and the universe. So this is a very selfless process that we are supposed to be engaging upon, right? Of self-refinement in order to improve everything that we're involved with. And so what I found to be the most efficient and the most effective means of doing that and reaching that goal is refinement through very specific African spiritual processes. And I've been initiated into 4 African spiritual traditions, right? I chose to become a Prince Hall Freemason. Some of you don't know, but my cousin Jerome Sanders, he's now an ancestor. And I know some of the brothers on this call are members of my lodge. Peace, Brother Broadnex. I see you on here, but Brother Jeter. I see a couple of y'all out there. And so, you know my cousin Jerome, past Master Sanders. He's a firecracker. But he was the one that brought me into the craft. And when I made the conscious decision to come into the craft, it was because my uncle Bobby had just transitioned and he had become a Mason, Robert Smoot. And when he passed, I understood that he was in line, for the younger brothers in my family. And so I said, you know what? Let me take up the banner. And this is just me thinking on the surface. I'm like, all right, I'll become a Mason, just in case some of my younger cousins want to be Masons. They'll already have an active member inside the lodge that can help to, promote and bring them in. That was my surface thinking, not understanding that it was actually a deeper part of my life purpose and a deeper part of my journey, in this thing called life. So that's a little bit of the backdrop of how I became a Mason. But then I was introduced to the Phylaxis Society. I was up in Washington, D.C., attending Howard, and then I came back and started working at Morgan, Bowie, and Howard, teaching at those universities up there in the DMV. And so I got really close with the brothers in the Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Washington, D.C. So we're talking like Brother Alton Roundtree, Brother Tahuti, the brothers that Brother Jackson was speaking about earlier. These are my roadies. And, we would go get Ethiopian food and just chop it up. And we would talk big time about big things. And past Master Roundtree, he likes to call us his long ball hitters, meaning that he put us in the lineup when he's ready to hit home runs and grand slams. That's how he liked to refer to us. But Roundtree himself, that brother writes encyclopedias. I do a lot of his covers for his books and also design the covers for the Phylaxis magazine. This brother's books are like encyclopedias. And so he's a wealth of knowledge. But I began to get closer with those brothers. They introduced me to the Phylaxis Society. Actually, it was Brother Rufus Duhart in Cincinnati from St. John's No. 3 that first mentioned Phylaxis Society to me. He sponsored my initial petition. And then I get up to DC and I realized there's some other brothers up here. Started writing for the magazine and started getting deeper and deeper into my Masonic research and scholarship. And all the while, as a student in psychology and then actually a practitioner of psychology as a clinician, I began to see how the two worlds overlap. And one of the things about being a doctor of clinical psychology is that I'm a part of the practical application of psychology. And that practical application of psychology is different than just theorizing. It's different than just pontificating, right? It's actually the part of psychology that's designed to manipulate and move human behavior from one place to the other. Now, let me say that differently, because he's a manipulator. Everybody start hiding their eyes and stuff like, all right, don't talk to him. But what I'm saying is manipulation by way of, I don't feel good today. I'm depressed. Can you help me to feel better? In other words, manipulate my emotional state to get me out of this funk. I'm dealing with these blockages, these anxieties. Can you help me to get past this stuff? Those are the things that I'm trained to do, right? Those are the things that I teach future clinicians to do. Is how to get in there and practically apply psychology. And so when I look at Freemasonry from that perspective, and when I look at Freemasonry understanding what our origins are, right, and the African Lodge, and my understanding is that we called it the African Lodge back in the late 1700s as an indication to where from whence our light comes. Because as all of us that on this call that are Masons, we know that there's nothing in the craft that's there by happenstance. Even if it's some of the later stuff that came and just started being attached to it, everybody who put anything into the craft did it for a particular reason, especially when it comes down to our symbolism. And a name is nothing more than a symbol, right? The Maarifa Chapter, that is a symbol. That is a symbol of the African-centered perspective and charge that this particular chapter of the Phylaxis Society has taken upon itself. It's the purpose for which it is designed to fulfill. And so when I look at our original name as African Lodge, to me, that's an indication that our founding fathers wanted us to what? Look back to our African selves in order to build upon what our ancestors have already done within the craft of Freemasonry. Now, I know there's a lot of discussion and debate about whether or not Freemasonry started in Africa. Of course, if you're on the interwebs, you see all kind of, especially on social media, you see all kind of debates and arguments and, folks, tongue in cheek, talking about, oh, here we go again. They talking about that African origin stuff. And then people will say things like, you don't see the word Freemason, in African languages, you don't see, and then some people try to pull out certain words that this is what that is. This is Freemason. And it's just like, we're splitting hairs at that point. If the core of being a Freemason is to improve upon yourself as an individual man for your collective, then we see that plenty throughout the continent of Africa. And I'm not just playing on words and I'm not stretching, I'm not reaching. But if we want to deal with Freemasonry just in the sense of being able to build, right? Being able to build buildings, not buildings just for the sake of having buildings, but building these buildings to reflect our culture and our spiritual awareness and our spiritual evolution. And I'm sure Brother Tahuti will talk about this next month when you look at the Temple of Man and you see how that temple is literally laid out, in the design and in the pattern of man. And then let me show y'all this real quick. And then after I'm gonna be jumping around with certain images, but when we start to understand on a deeper level what Freemasonry is, and we start looking at building and we start looking at how the ancients handle business, then it's like, okay, well, wait a minute now. Maybe they were Freemasons in the truest sense of the word, right? They built the buildings to be temples, to imitate our living temple, which is the human body. And this is the image that I created. And this is like the ineffable word of God, right? The tetragrammaton, some people call it. You got the Yod Hal, Val Hal, right? And when you stack it a certain way, it's in the image of man. And so that leans to that teaching of what? That God is within man. And some spiritual traditions understood this. Our ancestral traditions understood this. It wasn't blasphemous to say something like this. But again, looking back at our ancient cultures, we come to realize that what? That this is our birthright. This is our methodology. This is the way that we were designed to be. And so what I want to do today, specifically in this amount of time, we got we're down to 7:30, Brother Jackson?
That's correct.
Okay, then we have time at the end for Q&A, or how are we doing this?
Yes.
Okay.
We'll leave maybe 20 minutes for Q&A.
Okay, all right, cool. So just give me a heads up when it's time to shift gears. And so what I do is I'll carry the discussion as much and as far as I can within the time that we have allotted. I will be using slides on some of the stuff just to illustrate on images level. But what I really wanted to do is read some excerpts out of an article that I wrote called The Evolving Masonic Mind. It's of the same title. And of course, I'm gonna skip around in the article, just kind of hit some of the more salient points, just to kind of set the tone, set the premise, and then hopefully have a very lively and engaging discussion with you all on the back end of this. And so my statement of purpose, it comes on page 97. This is actually in volume 1 of Masonic Meditations. It's called Symbols. It says, "It is my express position that our Masonic degrees and ritual are designed to inspire and motivate the evolution of our capabilities as humans, with each degree ushering in the cognitive and spiritual advancement according to its type." Matter of fact, I can put this on the screen. Let me put this on the screen so y'all can read along with me. I've got it opened up in the PDF. Okay, so this is what I just read. According to its type, as brothers, being divested of our material goods and weighted in the antechamber of the lodge, we carry one degree of consciousness. This degree is dominated by a desire for more light. This desire presupposes an acknowledgement of the varying degrees of light, the possession of a certain amount of light, and the possibility of there being light beyond what one is currently experiencing. All I'm saying right there is that when we declare that we're in search of light or more light, that's like saying, okay, I've got some light. I got enough light to see that I need light and what light does for me. But then there's also an acknowledgement of what? That there are various degrees of light, meaning that there's an evolution of this thing. There's a way to see differently. And that's based upon light. So we're talking about light, like literally physical light, the light that you're using to see right now, the light that's reflecting off your computer screen, and as well as light as far as enlightenment or knowledge, wisdom, and understanding, the exchange of information. And so before making the conscious decision to enter upon this journey, many of us were totally unaware of the all-encompassing light. in which we are constantly bathed and constantly ingesting physiologically and literally via the melanin in our skin, hair, and eyes, by way of the foods we ingest that got it via the chlorophyll of plants, cognitively by our learning faculties, emotionally by the interactions we have with other living beings in our environment, etc. Going from the antechamber to the awaiting altar within, we are slowly but surely made more and more aware of this light, its various degrees of intensity, and how those individual rays shape the reality around us. Each and every degree, as stated, should make us more and more aware of the existing light, meaning a person existing as an EA should have less conscious control over and awareness of light than a person standing on the square of a master mason. The way that we delineate one degree of light from another purely exists on a cognitive level, specifically by what information one has obtained, the specific blanks associated with a particular degree, all of which is memorized, but not necessarily understood. And that's a point that I want us to deal with for a second. I was super impressed. I'm always super impressed whenever I am fortunate enough to experience degree work, right? Because the memory work, I mean, the way that our brothers are able to stand and recite the ritual to rattle it off back and forth is amazing to me. I love it. It's a skill in and of itself. I mean, a well-run ritual is just what it is. It's a well-run ritual, and it should be transformative. You should have that chill when you're experiencing that process. Now, what I've also come to understand is that a lot of times we leave it at memory work, right? And we rarely have an opportunity to delve deeper and deeper and deeper into the written symbolism, or even the pictorial symbolism of this degree work. And what I'm understanding as I continue to travel and seek more light is that the more that we delve and seek to understand these principles, right? Not just for memorizing, not just the intellectual part, but literally seeking understanding in it and becoming wise because of that understanding, the more enlightened we become and the more capable we become as human beings. And so that's that part. Let me jump back in here. And so understand symbolism process contained within the deeper or to advance to the next degree. This becomes problematic because based on ancient expressions of our modern practices, our degree work is literally supposed to open us to an elevated means by which to engage, master, and manipulate what we understand to be reality. We're supposed to be masters of reality, y'all. So this means that a master mason should be fully capable of engaging in a discussion about an everyday object in a way that differs in both quality and form from that of an EA or a non-mason. Again, I am not merely referring to our abilities to use certain jargon and intellectual references, but speak specifically of a demonstrated understanding of the subject on ever deepening levels and degrees. Before I jump into that example, let me show y'all something. All of these screens. Let me show y'all something real quick. So let's look at the bee, for example, right? You know, the bee is related to the beehive. Brother Jackson, did the bee just turn black on your screen?
Yes.
I don't know why I did that, because it wasn't that at first, right?
No,
Let me try to open that again. So one of our symbols is, yeah, all right. I don't know why that's happening. All right, so one of our symbols is the beehive, right? And we talk about the beehive and what it's symbolic of, you know, but when I thought about the beehive, I said, hey, wait a minute, we're talking about the beehive, but what created the beehive? And so that led me in my journey to seek deeper understanding about bees. And so, and when I started reading about bees and studying the phenomenon of a bee that is known as a bee, I was blown away. I started reading about the language of bees. I started reading about, how the bees communicate where the honey is and where the hive is. How they work together and how they literally create the queen bee by feeding her a very specific substance. And so she went from being a larva that was designed to just be a regular bee to being fed certain substances that made her multiply her weight and be able to pump off eggs, like just ongoing, and the ability to control the entire hive just based on the substance that she was ingesting. And so you could talk about the beehive in a symbolic sense, and then you could take it to a next level and begin to break down not only the hive itself and the hexagonal shape of the actual individual cells, but then also what it is that creates that and how they form and function, right? And so that's what I'm talking about when I say next levels of degrees of understanding things. This image here is another one of our symbols, right? The hourglass. So of course we talk about the hourglass and how time passes and things of that nature. And so when I was studying and meditating on the hourglass, I said, well, wait a minute, the history, it has a history. Some hourglasses were made with water instead of sand on the inside. But I looked at it, I said, let's look at the one with sand. And because it's sand that passes from one side to the next, I said, well, heck, let me study sand. And so I went down and really looked at sand on a molecular level. And I saw how sand, the forms, bonds, and all this other stuff. Brother Marlon Honeywell could talk more about the molecular structure of sand better than I ever could, because he's a chemist, down in Florida. But my only point is this, is that there are levels at which we can discuss all of these things. And so when we are leaving ourselves on the superficial surface level of these things, then what we're doing is we're selling ourselves short and we're blowing an opportunity. Another example of this FedEx sign, right? This is none of our first time seeing this FedEx logo. I'm sure of that. But I guarantee you that there are some brothers and some sisters, because I see it's all kinds of people in this call right now, who have never recognized the arrow that's in this FedEx logo. I guarantee there's somebody who's like right now looking and squinting like, wait a minute, there's an arrow in this logo? Yeah, it is. And it's always been there. And I give thanks to Brother Dick Gregory for pointing this out to me. We were driving in Nashville one day. He came down to Nashville and we was kicking and hanging out. And I was taking him back to the airport and there was a FedEx truck in front of us. Some of y'all have heard me tell the story before. He said, baby, you ever noticed the arrow in the FedEx logo? I said, no, what you talking about? The truck was in front. He's like, it's right there in your face. He started pointing. I was like, oh God, it is right there in your face. So I'm gonna go ahead and spoil it for those who haven't seen it yet. But the arrow is right here between the E and the X. And this is what we call being hidden in plain sight. And again, I didn't put it there. It didn't just magically appear. It's always been there. But there's a point in time where you don't see it, even though it's there. And now that you've seen it, you can never not see it. Again, these are the degrees of light that I'm talking about. When you could take an everyday thing like this FedEx logo and you would just automatically see it differently. Why? Because there are different ways to see everything, right? And so, we could go into the ancient Kemetic knowledge and understanding of neuroanatomy, right? As it was hidden in this symbolism here. There's levels to this stuff, right? We can look at how the cranial sutures, right, imitate the scarab beetle or Kepra, right? And Kepra is a symbol for the beginnings or the ever becoming, right? Constant renewal, constant regeneration, constant manifestation, constant creation, right? And what do you have underneath this cranial cap? You've got the brain. And the brain is a source, or at least a relay station for infinite possibilities, right? And so infinite creativity. Everything that you have ever thought to do or came up with to do, your brain was somewhere or another involved with that. Even if the idea came from somewhere else, your brain received it and it allowed your body the opportunity to act on it to bring it into fruition, right? So again, levels. This pesky $2 bill. So it's a lot of argument about this $2 bill and whether or not there's a black man on the back of it, blah, blah, blah. Who is the black man? Some say it was Prince Hall. Some say it was Benjamin Banneker. I don't say none of that stuff. What I do is acknowledge that he is there and he's sitting right here at this table. And a very quick story is that I was engaged in a conversation. It was kind of a heated conversation with some of my brothers. And, they were arguing that there ain't no black man on here, people making up stuff, blah, blah, blah. So being in DC, I'm able to go down to the Bureau of Engraving and Printing where they actually print the money. And so I took the tour and I asked questions. I said, how do you get the darker spots on the money, and distinguish it from the lighter parts? I asked those questions. I learned about the apprenticeship that people have to go through before they actually even allowed to engrave the bills. And one of the theories was that it was a mistake. They're saying that this dude's dark face right here is actually a smear or a mistake. And that's a very powerful smear because it's like literally, and this is a blurred vision now, but it literally respects his wig and his and his collar. So if it was a smear, that smear fell right in the lines in that boundary. But anyway, so it was the idea that it was a smear, that it was a mistake. The Bureau of Engraving and Printing said it couldn't be a mistake that shows up so consistently on every bill. He said, if that person's face is dark, it was meant to be dark. Ended that argument, ended that conversation. But again, when I go back to the actual the article, you'll see there are levels to how we should engage in these conversations. That's a very much anti-chamber type of conversation. That's the type of conversation you have before your mind has evolved at all. Once it evolves, you start talking about stuff on a whole different level, right? Let's see what else I got here. I'm not even going to all that. These are some African symbols. These are what we call the Dinkra symbols, right? This is our legacy. We have the ability to use symbolism to communicate very deep and very evolved messages, right? We have the ability and the tools, right, to use symbols to literally evolve our own understanding and experience of life, right? It's not just art, right? And a lot of people try to dismiss and say, oh, we have great art in Africa. It's more than art. Very, very rarely it was something for the sake of it just being, right? It usually always has a purpose for existence. And that purpose is usually always connected with divinity, right? It's usually always connected with helping us as humans, human beings, to evolve and to grow into our divine God selves, right? That's usually what everything in the African spiritual tradition, the so-called artistic expression, is about. And there were some people that worked very, 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 very hard to disconnect us from that. And those same people that worked hard to disconnect us from that also worked very hard to embrace it and ingest it themselves. And to me, that's always been peculiar because it's difficult for us to see that. I've traveled a bit. Some of y'all may have been to the Grand Lodge. I'm sorry, to the House of the Temple up in Washington, D.C. It's up there on 16th Street Northwest. And the House of the Temple, you know, when you look at it, and I shout out to Tony Browder, he was the first one to point this out to me. When you first look at the House of the Temple, you know, there's a step pyramid on the top of it. And then there are these two, with these sphinxes out front, you know, all of that is ancient Egyptian symbolism, ancient African symbolism. But then when you go inside, let me see if I can get this picture real quick. Let me back up real quick. When you go inside, you know, you see these two Egyptian priest statues, and I'll get to that in just a second. But before, look at this real quick. This is in a Washington monument. This is George Washington, and this is the Hurra Maquette. I'm sorry, the Heru Bedet. I'm sorry, it's the Heru Bedet. And this is above him, and it talks about spiritual ascension. Again, an African symbol above a Masonic brother's bust. Inside of a African symbol, the Tekken, the obelisk, the Washington Monument, right? This is all about our stuff. But when you go into the House of the Temple, this is in Congress, by the way. This is freedom, and people think that she had on a crown that had a bird on top of it. My understanding is that this is actually a part of her being, her person, right? And you'll see it in this ancient African iconography, where you got Heru with a hawk behind him. To me, this is the same symbol. To me, that's the same thing. It's that spiritual ascension. It's indicative of the disposition of their personality or their spirit in that moment. In this particular posture, this little initiate is reflective. He's in a contemplative state. And to me, this is an indication of his consciousness, his evolved consciousness, as well as a protective factor for him while he's in this contemplative state. So his conscious awareness is also protecting him. It's on guard, it's on watch. He has nothing to worry about, which reminds me of like a caterpillar. Y'all know, like when you got a caterpillar crawling around on his belly, eating leaves or whatever, eating grass blades. But then when it has that urge to evolve into a butterfly, it spins itself into a cocoon, into a chrysalis, right? It turns into a chrysalis. And it is totally vulnerable to the elements. It's nothing that it can do when it's in that deep contemplative, transformative state. It literally has to trust in whatever is responsible for it being alive, for it being a part of creation, for it being in existence, right? And so to me, that's the same level of trust that's being expressed in this statue right here, as this young initiate is in its contemplated, deeply meditative state, because it understands that it is protecting itself through its higher consciousness and through the intention of the work that he's actually engaged in. Let me get to the image of these statues real quick. There they are. So when you enter the House of the Temple, you've got these two statues, one on either side. And real quick, the way that the story goes, these are both in Egyptian, and they have Egyptian scripture right here on the gown in the front. But these are both Egyptian statues. They got on the headrest and everything. And the way that the story goes is that they quarried this stone in upstate New York, and they sent it down via train. And once the train got to Union Station, they laid tracks to go from Union Station over to 16th Street at the House of the Temple to drop these stones off, and then they were carved on site. And so they did all of that, put all those resources in to getting these stones to DC just to carve African symbols out of. Now, here's another thing. When you first walk into the House of the Temple, so I got this slogan that says always on. I'm always on. I'm always looking for what there is to be seen, right? My assumption is that there's always something to be seen. So I'm not in a mode of, oh man, is there something here? Is there something here? I'm assuming there is something here by default. That's my default state. And so when I walked into the House of the Temple, I stopped. I said, oh, snap. Y'all see these two circles here? These are the thrones of Aset. These are the thrones of Aset. When you look at any ancient Kemetic or ancient Egyptian deity, they're sitting on the throne of Aset. When you look at any of the ancient royalty and their symbolism, they're sitting on the throne of Aset. This is the foundation, right? It's called Yesod in the Kabbalah. It's Aset. It's the throne of Aset in the Kemetic tradition, right? And it represents that foundation of power, right? It's that symbol of where power rests. And you just so happen to have two of them. Right here, I'm standing in the foyer when I took this picture. And it's right here in the House of the Temple. That's a bust of Albert Pike right there. So anyway, if you walk too far in, you don't see them. If you're too far back, you don't see them. You've got to be within a certain range to see these symbols. And not only that, you got to know what these symbols are to even be able to recognize them. I just so happen to have been initiated into an African Kemetic spiritual system. So I know these things. I see this. As soon as I saw it, I said, that's the throne of Aset. Let me go back so y'all can see it. Y'all see it? Plain as day, right? Plain as day. I've never heard anybody point that out. I've never heard anybody recognize that. This is the power of our craft. And this is the power of our craft when we do it in an evolved state, right? When we take our growth and our development seriously, this is what we're talking about, right? And our ancestors gave us every tool that we would possibly need to be successful at this work that we have agreed to do. All right, so for example, now I did all that. Now let me get back to this. So for example, I would consider a non-Masonic discussion of an apple to be argumentative and centered around whether or not an apple is actually an apple. Y'all have heard arguments like that, right? No, nobody that's in this call right now would dare argue like that. But some of us, I would dare say, have been in conversations, discussions, or groups to where this is the level of the conversation. Folks are literally looking right at an apple, arguing whether or not it's an apple. That's non-Masonic, right? And you know, tell the brother, if you ever engage in a brother and they're arguing like this, tell them I said it. This is non-Masonic, right? You are not demonstrating the degrees that you claim to have, but it happens all the time. This type of discourse betrays the inability of an individual's mind to conceive of and process an apparent reality. This can be due to physical blindness or mental stubbornness. Usually it's the latter. The former is understandable and excusable. The latter, not so much. We have all experienced situations in which either we ourselves or someone with whom we are engaged in a conversation has been stubborn to the point of denying a verifiable truth that exists right before their eyes. Again, nobody in this call right now, nobody in this Zoom right now, but we all know somebody or who has at least known somebody who's been in a conversation like that. We perhaps experience this every day when someone seems to argue simply for the sake of arguing, refusing to accept the fact that maybe, just maybe, there's insight and information beyond what they have been exposed to or received. We are all incorrect at one point or another, even the most evolved of us. This level of arguing is more about the attitude of the one doing the arguing. It is often coming from a place of rigidity and purposeful ignorance, meaning they know they don't know, but pretend as if they do for the sake of maintaining a position they have always purported or simply to save face. A slightly more advanced perspective, and I'm gonna go quickly through this, than an EA, a slightly more advanced perspective is that of an EA. This acknowledges the apple, but wants to debate on the type of apple. So initiating a debate on this level does not require any true depth, but instead centers on the fact that the apple is either red, green, or yellow in color. The discussion remains very concrete and very factual. The limitations of this sort of discussion rest in the fact that too much time and energy are utilized debating relatively trivial matters. And so I go through the EA, I go through the fellowcraft degree, as well as the Master Mason degree. The whole point is that with every degree that you embrace, you should be evolving in the way that you are able to engage and embrace reality, right? And it's always beyond the surface. if I went down, if we was in DC and I took y'all down to the Cumberland River or down to the Potomac River in DC, or in Cincinnati, I took y'all down to the Ohio River, we could all stand on the banks of that river and look at that river and say, this is the river, right? But then I throw on some scuba gear, like, yo, put this scuba gear on, and we jump into the water. And I'm like, no, this is the river, right? Now we underwater, like we see more of it, right? But then we come back out the water, and I put a drop of that water on a microscope on one of them plates and put it under a microscope. I said, no, that's the river, right? There are levels to understanding what it is that we're talking about. And if we're not into the habit of regularly exploring deeper levels, then we're doing ourselves a disservice, and we're wasting the time, resources, and opportunities that we have in front of us, right? And so one of the issues is that the world that we're living in right now, it rewards the left brain thinking, right? It rewards the mode of thinking that deals with syllogistic logic, that deals with sequential ordering of things. If this, then that, right? We've got this thing called the scientific method that tells us that the only way to perform science is according to these steps and these stages, right? And if you can't duplicate it on command, if you can't hear it, taste it, smell it, see it, touch it, it don't exist, right? And so what that does is it limits what we understand our capabilities, our mental capabilities to be. So for example, one of the arguments about, again, the origins of the African origins or the African relationship, African spiritual relationship to Freemasonry, one of the arguments is that they've never found any documentation to prove that, right? And when you look at the historical record, you see that there was a period of time where documentation was actually being stolen and or destroyed. And so if I can lock you into a way of reasoning that says that the only way that you can verify something as being true is that if you have a physical document, something that's tangible to point to, then what I've effectively done is I've prevented you from ever being able to embrace anything that I've now hidden from you or destroyed so that it no longer exists. On the flip side of that, I can almost guarantee that almost everybody in this discussion right now has known somebody that's had a dream and something about that dream proved true. Here's something I'm gonna throw out there. If your grandmama had a dream about fish, what does that mean? Go ahead, Brother Bradford. What does that mean, Brother Hogue?
Oh, that clearly means somebody pregnant.
It means somebody pregnant. Brother Bishop, you unmuted yourself because you was gonna say the same thing, huh? It don't matter where you are. It don't matter if we could be in Mississippi right now. We could be over in West Africa right now. And somehow or another, we understood and know, because Big Mama, she ain't just saying that either, right? She's right. And she's gonna know exactly who to call because she got an idea of which one of them it is. And she's gonna place the call. And if she's wrong about the one, she ain't wrong about the fact that somebody's pregnant. And we all know that. How do we all know that? Now, y'all ready to really have your head busted? In West Africa, there's an Orisha named Yemaya. And Yemaya deals with the ocean, right? She governs the ocean. So she governs fish. But guess what else she governs? Pregnancy. Guess what else she governs? Altered states of consciousness like dreaming. Y'all ready to go further? Let's jump all the way to East Africa now. There's a Neteru, also a deity named Osset. Guess what? And also known as Isis. Guess what Osset governs? The ocean, fish, lunar cycles, pregnancy, dreams. It governs the exact same thing. And so those are ways of knowing that don't necessarily ascribe to the scientific method. But again, if I tell you that this is the only way to know, because science is based on the Latin word scio, which means to know. And so when we say that this is the scientific method, that means that this is the way of knowing and verifying knowledge. And what you have done is you've effectively dulled an entire set of tools and mental capabilities that we naturally possess by making us only look to do things according to this way, this very limited Western way. And it's a reason for that as well. You got to remember that we as descendants of Africa and the African Lodge, we naturally adhered to these other ways of being, right? We understood that We can use certain flowers. We can use certain oils. We can use certain colors. We can use certain rhythms. We can use certain chants or mantras or word sound power to manipulate physical reality. We understood that. And when it was a process of enslaving and dominating a very powerful group of people, one of the first things you need to do is separate them from their power, right? You need to take away any and everything that they can access that gives them power, because with power, they can overthrow and they can implement their own will and their own desires. They don't have to be subjected to yours, right? So the first thing you do is you separate them from that as much as possible. And then one of the next things you will have to do is what? Make sure that they don't ever want to touch it again. And so you make it wicked, you make it pagan, you make it heathenistic, you make it sacrilege, you make it everything but good. So then for generations, what? We're teaching our next generations to avoid it, right? Then you start showing commercials and stuff for starving African babies, right? So then everything about Africa becomes something really bad, right? Especially the polytheistic pagan groups over there, right? I mean, I could take y'all to a Catholic church right now and show you polytheism. They're called saints, right? We're praying to the Virgin Mary. I could do it in Latin. I went to Catholic high school. I could do it in Latin. I could do the Our Father in Latin. I know how to do that stuff. All of that is, is ceremony, is ritual, right? And it's actually polytheistic, meaning multiple aspects of God, right? Not necessarily multiple gods, multiple aspects of God. Understanding that what? Anything that's in creation, anything that's a part of reality is a part of God. And so you would recognize these various parts of God as they exist. If it's God, as God exists in the ocean, we personify that. Well, that's Yeh-Ma-Yah, right? Why is it Yeh-Ma-Yah? Because it's easier to remember when you could teach some high level principles in a story form. Hence our whole allegory, right? That's why we teach an allegory, because it's easier to remember, right? What happened, to Hiram Abiff. It's easier to remember that because it's in story form. The unfortunate part is that we leave it in story form, and we rarely break it down to see what the higher science and principles of truth that exist in that story, right? That's what that's all about. And so when we're talking about evolving our mind Masonically, right? All I'm talking about is using our Masonic tools, using our Masonic symbolism, not just as a part of our rote memory ritual, but actually as tools for transformation, right? The trowel, for example, we talk about using the trowel to spread the cement, right? And so you think about that. Get you a real trowel, get you a real one, get you a real bag of cement, and see what it takes to be able to spread that. In the days of old, we used to do stuff like, what I understand is that at some point in time, our Masonic brothers, more than not, were able to literally build things, right? So not only were we speculative, sitting up in lodges, but we were actually operative as well. Whether you were just building a stone barbecue in your backyard, or whether you was, framing up a new room, whether you built your own home, whether you were actually working on your car, you were mechanically inclined, whatever it is, we've always had the operative and the speculative working together. Nowadays, we pride ourselves in being speculative, meaning that we sit back and we pontificate, over symbolism. We conduct our meetings and our rituals and all this stuff, and we feel really good about that. But it's that operative part that's really going to teach us, right? It's really going to allow us to understand the manipulation of materials, right? To understand how you could bring wood to bind with concrete. You could bring plaster, what you got to do to prime, you got to put primer down before you put paint on. All of these different types of things are these higher levels of thinking and higher levels of understanding that can only come to you through the practical application of the work that we're talking about, right? And so that's a part of the evolution of our minds, is to return back to the practical work, to return back to the operative aspects of Freemasonry. Because when you learn how to build, right? When you learn how to manipulate materials, and it shifts your mind, it shifts your view of reality, it shifts your view of all the things that are constructed around you. But one of the most important things it's going to shift your perspective on is yourself, your own physical body. Because then you're like, well, wait a minute. The same way that I had to mix water, with this bag of concrete and put some sand in it and all this other type of stuff and stir it, in order to shape and mold, it's the same way that my body was put together, except it was different materials. But then you start to recognize, like, well, wait a minute, this is a living temple here, complete with you got bones, You got muscle tissue, you got fat tissue, some of us more than others. You got blood cells, you got neurons, you got neurological tissues, you got all kinds of stuff that's coming together and building this living temple that you are. Higher level thinking. So when you look back at the ancient Kemetic or the ancient Egyptian people, right? And you see that they had those canopic jars on the scene where they were, I'm not gonna pull that down, I might make a book for it, but I've got a scene on my drape back here where they show like the 4 sons of Heru standing on the lotus flower. And when you see those 4 jars and you learn what's inside of those jars, you realize that, you know, that our ancestors were honoring the God that exists within our human body by acknowledging and taking care of our organs, right? And so it's a judgment scene. And in that judgment scene, you have the 4 sons of Heru, which were jars that contain very specific organs from the human body, right? And they're all standing there on this lotus flower, and they're facing the judge, which is Osir, or also known as Osiris. And they're standing there facing Osiris as if they're communicating with Osiris or Osir. And my understanding and interpretation of that scene is that your organs within your body, right, symbolized by each one of these deities that's in a form of a canopic jar, are testifying either for or against you. So your liver is in one of those jars. And so your liver's standing there, your liver got cirrhosis, right? I mean, is your liver damaged for overconsumption of alcohol, right? Is your heart, you know, the weighing of the heart scene, is your heart heavy? Have you taken care of the God within you, in other words, right? And if we don't know that that's who we are, if we don't know that that's what we are, then we definitely can't function intentionally in that way. And so we're going to always be selling ourselves short. And so, again, when I'm talking about the evolution of our mind, Masonically or not, within this context is Masonic. What I'm basically saying is that when you intentionally set out to refine yourself, when you intentionally set yourself up to value yourself as a divine creation, when you push back against that notion that we evolved from apes, and you flip that and say, no, we descended from God, you have to have a different perspective on life and what you are. When you push back against that notion that you are a quote unquote born sinner, and you say, no, I'm born divinity, you flip the whole paradigm. Like that's a judo flip. You put that joint right on his ear, right? MMA style. You know, you Anderson Silva that joint. It's like, think about this for a second. Let's evolve our minds real quick. The difference between being evolved from monkeys means what? That we are at the pinnacle of what we could be. Why? Because we're no longer monkeys. We're not apes anymore. You know, our closest cousin is a chimpanzee. I ain't talking about y'all's cousin. I ain't talking about my real cousins either. But they say, you know, evolutionarily, the chimpanzee is the closest thing to a human being, so to speak. And so that's different. So that means we good. We're steady growing. Now flip that and say we're descendants of God. Then it's like, we've fallen a long way from our potential, right? And what that does is it encourages us to what? Get back to something. It encourages us to look like, oh, well, shoot, if we are truly descendants of God, and we have to be, because we, you know, I don't care how you define God. If you see God as the supreme power, right? No, what you call him, Allah, you call it Jesus, you call it, you know, Jehovah, whatever, you know, Buddha, whatever. If God is the supreme being and we descended from that, that means that we have the potential for divinity within us. And it lets us know that we've got something other than this physical and this mental aspect of ourselves that we can rely upon. And that's our spirituality. The born sinner notion. I have never seen a baby just born evil and just born just defiant of God. I just ain't never seen it. We're told that. And I hear y'all. I hear some of y'all thinking right now, well, no, that ain't what that means. I hear you. I hear you. But we all agree that we've been told that we were born in sin and that we are born sinners. And that, you know, and that initial sin of Adam and Eve is now visited upon us, right? And what I come to understand is like, yep, we are dealing with generational curses. Yep, we all have them in our lineage and in our family and in our bloodlines. Absolutely. And I also know that we all have the responsibility, the right, the duty, the privilege, and the honor to be the ones to break those generational curses. And I also know this is that people can intentionally insert a generational curse into your family, meaning that you got some people that are conniving that way and plotting to where they could say, I'm going to disrupt this lineage. I see too much potential. The King Herod, kill them before they grow, right? Let's get rid of all these baby boys because I heard that there's a generation coming that's got the great potential to set this thing right. And I need to keep functioning the way I am. We got to kill them before they grow. He wasn't looking for one. He wasn't looking for one. He was looking for a whole group. It was an entire generation with the potential, to evolve and to wake up. Jesus was a part of a group. People thought that his cousin John the Baptist was him because first of all, they heard about Jesus. And then they saw John. They said, whoa, that looks like the guy that we've been hearing about. John, like, nah, that ain't me. That's my little cousin. He'll be out here in a minute. You remember when Mary rolled up on Elizabeth? Elizabeth was already pregnant. The baby quickened in her stomach when Mary showed up. John moved in, one of their bellies moved, but they was cousins. I think it was like 3 months apart. And so they was a part of that same initiation group. And if you think about it like this, for everybody here that's a Mason, you could only be made a Mason by what? An existing Mason. So there was no way that John the Baptist could have performed the baptismal rite for Jesus if he wasn't qualified to do so. So whatever he was baptizing and initiating Jesus into, he himself has already gone through it, right? And so when we look, again, backing all the way out, born into sin, to me, that was one of those ploys to make us settle for less than what we could actually be. If you're born sinner, then that means what? We're expected to sin. I'm only human, right? Only human. But if you're a descendant of God and you are divine, you're like, oh, snap. Let me leave those things behind, right? Let me quit tripping. Let me quit giving in to these limitations. Let me do any and everything that I could possibly do to develop myself, right? To expand my concept of myself, right? To be able to function in this world and not be of this world's limitations, right? Let me be able to walk amongst the people and understand that I am not like them. We talk about supernatural, being church supernatural, we're doing all that stuff. Let's get it. Because these are all capabilities that we have. It's our duty and it's our responsibility and it's our privilege, our honor, and our right to awaken the God within us and to walk in that without apology. To begin to care for ourselves as if we are a divine creation, right? To honor our bodies as if it is the true and living temple of God, because that is what it is. That is what we've understood it to be for longer than we've been confused about what it is. Meaning that this little blip in time, and I'm gonna close in a second, this little blip in time that we've been confused and we've been hitting our head and we woke up confused. And y'all notice in the story, we were never restored back to our knockout state. We never were. We were raised up into somebody else's stuff. It's very deep symbolism there. In a closed lodge, we'll go deeper. but this is the part of the game that I really want us to give. If you don't remember nothing else I said tonight, just deal with the fact that your book tells you that ye are gods. And that's written in red in the Bible. Look to your neighbor and say, neighbor, that's written in red. That means Jesus said it. That means that's that truth, right? That's truth. And so when you start to walk as if that's the case, and you understand that everything you do is a part of your evolution, or you can make it a part of your evolution, and that we've got a ways to go to get back to our divinity, then that sets you on the right path. And to quote the brother that was playing, he was portraying the Honorable Elijah Muhammad in the Malcolm X movie. He says, if you take one step towards Allah, Allah takes 2 steps towards you. And what I'm saying is if you take 1 step towards reclaiming your divinity will take 2 steps towards you. And it's almost an instantaneous change. Brothers, we got every tool that we need. We've got all the information that we could ever need. We've got all the resources that we need. It's just up to us to make the individual choice to go ahead and put this into practice and to do so without apology. And on that note, Brother Jackson, the Maarifa Chapter, I really appreciate this invitation. We could have been talking for 10 hours and I still would have felt like it wasn't enough time. So it ain't, that's just me, but I really value this opportunity to talk, about these subjects and these topics. And I look forward to, contributing or coming back around anytime. Just call me. You know how to reach me, good brother.
Okay, I appreciate you. Thank you once again. Let's give a round of applause for Brother Menzise. You can do that virtually, or you can do that, unmute yourself. We're gonna do a little Q&A now. So don't go away too soon. We want to engage a little bit. If you have questions, feel free to put them in the chat, or you can simply raise your hand and then raise your virtual hand or raise your real hand, and I'll get around to you. And we'll go from there. But any questions?
Let's talk, brothers, sisters, peoples.
We have Brother Leonard, Christopher Leonard has a question. What books do you recommend to aid in evolving our Masonic and African minds?
So there's a book. It's not from a Masonic author, but there's a series of books. It's called Herbach, and I know Burlew. I heard you thinking about opening of the way, Burlew. I'm gonna get to that one. But it's a couple of books. It's called Herbach. I'm trying to see if I got one accessible real quick to grab it and show it. But it's Herbach. H-E-R is the first word. B-A-K is the second word, and it's 2 volumes. But what that book is about is written from a child's perspective. The main character is a child. And it's designed, boom, that's what I'm talking about. Resourceful scholar, researcher, real quick. That's what I'm talking about. But this is Herbach. This is volume 2, Egyptian Initiate. The first one is The Living Face of Ancient Egypt. And it's about a young man. Yeah, that's it right there with the little boy on the cover. Right there, yep. That's the first one, Living Face of Ancient Egypt. And what it does is it talks about a young boy being brought into the initiatory ranks. First, he's seen in the community as a young boy with promise. And so the elders, the initiates, they see him, and the sage specifically taps him and brings him into the inner temple. And so what you get is the experience of this young brother being initiated. And he goes through various teachers. He goes through a wood joiner. He goes through a sculptor. He goes through all these different things. And so you get the opportunity to evolve with him as he's going on his journey. And it is a true Masonic journey. Although it's not written as if he's being initiated in Freemasonry, that's exactly what it is happening. So there's 2 volumes of this. The second volume goes so hard, but then there's another book called The Opening of the Way. So, and that's by the same author, Aisha Schwaller de Lubix, right? It's The Opening of the Way, and it's a very, very powerful, it's like Herbach condensed down into one book. And it's very dense and it's very deep, but it's very powerful and very enlightening. So those 3 books, the 2 Herbachs and The Opening of the Way. And then of course, our Masonic meditation series. That's a 3-volume set. And it's my Masonic articles brought together, in deep thought. Everything I do is to stimulate thought and evolution of the mind. So those things, those are some that I would suggest right off the bat. Oh, and also the Medu Netter. I do have these handy. This is volume 2, but the Medu Netter by Ra Nefer Amen. I strongly recommend those, volumes 1 and volume 2 especially. But those are classics, and that's about spiritual growth and development. And it's my intention to, at the next Phylaxis convention, hopefully we will be back together in person in March. When that's not the one there. It's the one by Ra Nefer Amen. But you got to probably put in Medu Netter volume 1. And it's METU. There it is down at the bottom. That's volume 2, but it's METU. But that's the volume 2 right there. But then there's also volume 3. So anyway, I'm hoping that that's what's up, Chris. I appreciate the support, brother. I remember signing them and sending them to you. But those are what I would suggest, man. And the Medu Netter by Ra Nefer Amen, that's straight up Kemetic African spirituality. That's actually one of the Kemetic sciences that I was initiated into, was actually in the priesthood there. I did that simultaneous to getting my degree at Howard. But those are some books that I would suggest, Chris. Anything from Aisha Schwaller de Lubix, though, for sure.
Okay. I have a quick question for you, Brother Menzise. One of the things that was very exciting and enlightening about your lecture this evening was the way in which you sort of helped us to think about the degree work, but also the way that we sort of imagine our role as we try to evolve our minds. And it does beg the question that if there is such a thing as being the best version of ourselves as we seek to be better men, what does that look like from your perspective? I mean, what does it look like to, yeah, we may never know the exact perfection of who we are, but but what does it look like to sort of be even better than where we are right now as an organization? I mean, as a brotherhood, as a universal brotherhood across the board, particularly trying to deploy and employ some of the symbols that you talked about today.
Right. Yeah, so just so I make sure I'm understanding your question, you're saying, what does that look like? It to be an evolved version of ourselves as a collective?
Right.
One thing that I would say, and one thing that I love to do is when we compare our Grand Lodges, when we compare our Prince Hall Grand Lodges to the Grand Lodge Estate, right? We see that there's a vast difference, you know what I mean? And we're talking about like just the physical structure itself of the buildings, right? And to me, of course, the Grand Lodge Estate, White Masonic brothers, they have had a head start, right? They've been at this, they trace theirs back to whenever they do that pub in London, 1711, if we're talking about, England. But they also give tribute to their ancients as well. But what I'm saying is that they've had a head start because we're still, quote unquote, coming up from slavery. That's one part of it. But I was talking up to one of our high level White Masonic brothers in DC one time. And I had this idea and this theory that I stand by is that they know something about the craft and how to use it that we haven't figured out yet. And I maintain that. And the way that they practice ain't the same way that we do it. It might be the same ritual, it might be the same movement, but it's something else that they can apply that makes it so that they don't have to necessarily throw fish fries all the time. You know what I mean? They got another way of tapping into, the universal resources and bringing that wealth forward and that long-term, that longevity and that sustainability. And so what it looks like for us to become more evolved as Masons, as practitioners of Freemasonry, right? Specifically those of us that are descendants from the African Lodge. It looks like us unapologetically embracing our culture and using our spiritual tools to help to better understand the tools of Freemasonry and then to apply them in a practical way for our own self-growth and development. It looks like a more efficient and more effective craft. It looks like what it used to be when we would march in procession and the community stopped and watched us in awe because they understood that those are those Masons over there. Those are those brothers that get it done. Those are those brothers that make things move when they say for things to move. Those are the brothers that make sure that our community is continuing to improve itself because those are the men that our young boys are looking up to, right? Those are the men that are training up the next generation. In any given lodge, you see multi-generations of men standing shoulder to shoulder, right? I love being in the presence of my elders. When I was being raised, there was an elder. I'm trying to, I got to remember who it was. It was so long ago, it was in the throes. But he looked at me, he said, one thing I love about this, and I'm paraphrasing. I said, what's that? He said, it's a man with he might've said third grade education, get a chance to teach a Ph.D. something, And I was like, damn right, because I've learned a lot, you know what I mean? But it's that's what we look like. We look like the divinity and the superheroes that we are meant to be, right? We look like the people who can say, we need some resources and we need them now. And boom, we're able to make that manifest by one way or another. That's what it looks like. More efficient, more effective, and more powerful.
Okay. Brother Sam, you have a question?
Yeah, well, thank you for being here with us and sharing your information. I have two questions. I think you kind of answered the first question. I feel like Black Masons particularly have an attachment to the way Europeans have shaped Masonry, and it's hard to move us away from that. You talked a little bit about how it looked, but in terms of describing it more, what part are we? How can it change, or how can it be shaped? Is it going to involve us bringing our rituals into the spaces that we have now? What is it? Is it going to look? Is it going to start looking more African? I mean, what do you see that? Or how do you see that move going, as well as dealing with our? I think the issue that we have, and I'm just saying this for me, the issue that I think we have in leaving European traditions. And the second question is about women in the space of Masonry. If you can touch a little bit about that. You talked a lot about Egyptian culture, and from what I understand, women were as much a part of the priest class as well as anybody else. So how do women fit in that as well?
Got you. All right, thanks, brother. And so with the whole the Egyptian culture piece, you know, you're absolutely right. The sisters were in the priesthood as well, but they were in their priesthood. And so it's like we did have that, you know, that what Obata Shaka calls the twin lineal approach, meaning there was masculine and feminine, and we had that balance. And we still maintain that, but it's in the Order of Eastern Stars and the Freemasons, right? Those are our sisters. And ideally, their formula would be moving them along the same type of trajectory, so that when we meet on the other side, you know, their equivalent of a Master Mason, when we meet up, we're both supposed to be evolved to the same degree and able to see eye to eye without necessarily knowing the details of what they did to get to that point, right? And it's like, for example, when you look at traditional rites of passage, the boys always go with the men and the girls always go with the women, you know, for certain rights, for those developmental rights. It is a separate thing. It's a separate evolution, because while we understand that we are the same in many ways, there are some very striking and very important differences. Like, for example, in the reproductive process, you know, we deliver a seed, they cultivate it and they grow it, and then they produce the fruit of it, right? We don't even have to be there for 2 seconds, right? And, you know, in fact, we ain't got to be there at all. They could just get a seed and that seed could get planted without your presence, right? And so we do our part, but we're very different in that way. And so the separate trajectories are actually in balance with African principle and African understanding. It's just that when you get into the Western perspective of it and the Western understanding of it, or the European understanding of it, it makes that difference a better or a worse thing. And it's not, it's just a difference. Our women are just as powerful as we are and as we will ever be. There's equality there, but there's difference in who and what we actually are. And therefore, the different processes are actually necessary, right? So that's that part of it. But then the thing about the rituals in our spaces and leaving the European traditions, there's a couple of ways that can be addressed. One of which, again, is the African rite that I'm developing. And I'm hoping to really be able to do something with that by our next Phylaxis convention in March. Hopefully we'll be back in person. If you all aren't a member of Phylaxis Society, I strongly recommend that you become a member of the National Phylaxis Society. And if you're in Ohio, definitely join the Maarifa Chapter. And wherever you are, join your local chapter as well. It's a phenomenal organization filled with scholars, you know, from the elders to the youngins, you know, all there building together collectively. But anyway, there's 2 ways that you can approach that. The African rites is the more African approach to ritual, right? And it is designed to be transformative, using African cultural symbolism and true African spiritual processes that I've actually gained access to by being initiated into real African spiritual systems, right? And so we will have the opportunity to have that transformative experience. And then the flip side of that is that you don't necessarily have to leave quote unquote European traditions, right? You can just refine your own mind and shift your own worldview so that you're looking at the same, you know, ritual that's been written and implemented in the European lodges, you know, for decades, for centuries, for millennia, however far back it's going to go. And you still have the African-centered lens through which you're looking at it. And so, like, we have one of the rough ashlar, for example. I learned of an African spiritual way of utilizing the rough ashlar and the true African spiritual tradition. And it works. I mean, it's like, it's European concept, European, derived symbol as it currently exists. Although we know that in building those temples in ancient Africa, we had plenty of rough ashlars that we had to smooth out in order to fit them perfectly for building, right? But there's a way to use that from an African-centered perspective that actually impacts you as an individual person. So if you shift your perspective, I think that that's more valuable. If you shift your worldview and shift your perspective, that's more valuable than wearing a dashiki to your lodge meeting, right? That's more valuable than changing your name from Jeff Menzise to Manaka Moore. That's it, it's my Kemetic name. Although that change in my name and that symbolism and the vibration that comes with the acknowledgement of that name, it does transform me as well. But I don't have to walk around in dashikis. I got a ball cap and a t-shirt, and I'm still walking around as an African initiated priest, right? But it doesn't have to be the surface part. It's the internal expression that's more important. And so I think that we would get more brothers to be able to embrace the African worldview at this stage, maintaining our current ritual system. We don't got to throw it away. We just got to shift how we use it, how we look at it, how we view it, and how we perceive it. Once we do that, then it don't matter what symbol you're looking at, right? That's why we got the volume of sacred law. It don't matter what religion you coming with, as long as you acknowledge the supreme being, right? And then that allows me to what? Look at the Bhagavad Gita, look at the Surah, in the Quran, look at the Talmud, look at the Holy Bible, right? It allows me to look at all of those things as expressions of God, right? It don't matter what language or culture it's referencing. It's all expressions of God. That's the evolved level that we want to get to. So then the surface and superficial differences don't even matter anymore, because I'm gonna be able to pull a nugget of truth out of all of that stuff, every last bit of it. And so that's how I would respond to that first question, bro. And the second question about the sisters, man, we already got it. We just got to shift our mind and get out this Western perspective and thinking that somehow that they are subservient or less than, or need to come over into the Masonic lodge in order to, really be able to build. No, they got what they got over there. And from my understanding, that star is shining bright. But if they don't shift to the African perspective, we got daughters of Isis. That's African, right? We already got everything we need. Because the truth be told, my understanding is that they took it from us anyway. And all we're doing is reclaiming. We're reclaiming our stolen legacy by becoming Masons. That's just a part of our reclaiming our stolen legacy. And one thing I said to the white Masonic brother I was talking to in DC, I said, another thing is, I think that somewhere there was an agreement made that if we ever woke up and asked for our stuff back, y'all had to give it to us. But the catch was, y'all didn't have to tell us how to use it. So right now, we got it back. People wondered why Albert Pike, shared the Scottish Rite degrees the way that he did. He was a staunch racist on the surface, but brother Ken Collins Upchurch, he showed, he found evidence that, literally Albert Pike shared, those degrees with a Black Mason behind the scenes. You got to ask yourself, why would somebody do something like that? And I think that it's on principle. They had to. They didn't have a choice. Once we woke up and asked for our stuff back, like our founding 15, knocked on all those white Masonic doors, say, nope. We'll let y'all march in procession and we'll let y'all bury y'all dead, but y'all can't get all these degrees. Nope. What we do, sent a letter across the ocean, got verified by those that was verifying the white Masons here. Now we on level playing ground. They couldn't deny us. They just couldn't do it. And it's for us to understand what that actually means. I hope I answered it okay, good brother.
Okay, any other questions? Anybody have any other questions? As you wait for other questions to come in, one thing that does emerge for me is, being also in this sphere where we do research, it's really important to sort of verify your sources, and I appreciate that you have done that. You've provided us with multiple sources throughout this talk. I've also seen where some of the conversations sort of devolve into a series of speculations that some might think of as Betty Crocker, just kind of made up stuff. And I'm wondering, what's your advice for someone who is just now getting into this, just now getting into sort of studying and researching? What tools or what advice would you give them as they seek to discover the truth around what this legacy is meant to be, what the symbols are meant to convey, etc.
Yeah, one of the first things is to be humble, to be receptive, and to approach the quest for light, the quest for knowledge, wisdom, and understanding from a position of understanding that it can come from anywhere, right? In fact, it is everywhere and it's in all things. So there's nothing that you can't learn from if you're interested in learning. There's nobody you can't learn from as long as you're interested in learning. So, to be receptive, to read various perspectives, to listen to various perspectives, to listen more than you talk, especially when you're on a quest to learn how to ask questions, but to also learn how to listen to the answers that you get. A lot of times when we're in conversations or debates or discussions, a lot of times we're listening to formulate our next statement. And so don't be so quick to just jump into that next thing. Because a lot of times folks drop jewels on you. And when they drop jewels on you, we ready to just jump to the next thing. Well, you just got something that you need to digest, right? And make sure that you actually heard it. So I would just say, slow walk it, but stay eager, stay vigilant, stay hungry. You don't ever want to be satiated and satisfied because, then you get complacent, and know that you don't know it all. You would never know it all, but just understand that getting to a point to where you can access anything that you want to know, then you can find peace. Like I've been in lecture halls when I was teaching at Howard, Brother Jackson. Lecture hall, I have 170 something students in this room. All of them are in college, right? All of them are at Howard University. So that lets you know that there's a certain level of intellectual capability in this room. And I got 170 something of them joints. And so me being in front of that lecture hall, proclaiming to be the professor that's going to teach all of these minds something, and that they have been given a reading assignment, which could have sparked a thought about any and everything that they now have fair game and full range to ask me or confront me or challenge me about. Imagine that situation. One of the best things I learned to do was to say, I don't know. Damn, that's a good question. I love the fact that y'all are thinking that way. I tell you what, I don't know. I got some ideas, but I don't want to misspeak. Next class, remind me at the beginning of the class to revisit this question, because what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go look some stuff up. I'm gonna go do a little bit of research and read, and and I'll come Friday with a response. Boom. And guess what I've just done? Learned something new. How did I do it? Because I was humble enough to stay receptive and to understand that every good teacher is also a good student, and every good student is also a good teacher, right? And so those are some of the things that I would suggest is, stay receptive, stay humble, and know that you never know it all, and to find peace in that space to where you know that you can access knowledge about anything that you need or want knowledge about. Access it, get your library card, so to speak, right? They call it the Akashic record, which is supposed to be that metaphysical realm that contains knowledge of all things. You want to get your access card to that, so that no matter what it is that you need to know, you rest assured that you're gonna find out. You can access it. And that's the disposition that I'm in. I don't have to know everything because I know how to access anything I need to know. And I'm good after that. What else y'all got? Y'all quiet out there. Where y'all at, family?
All right. Well, this is very exciting. I always get energized when I get a chance to hear you speak. And this is such a privilege and honor for us here in the Maarifa Chapter. Everyone who is here on the line still, please keep in mind that this is the third of the 4 lectures in our series this year. The fourth one being to Hootie Evans, who will be joining us the second Wednesday of October, which is October 13. Same bat time, same bat place, and you can get using the same Zoom link. We will be sending out an announcement as that approaches, but let's all give one final round of applause for Brother Jeff Menzise.
Appreciate y'all, family. Really, really appreciate it. I just put my thanks, Dave. I put my email address on my website in the chat. please shoot me an email, any follow-up questions or thoughts or whatever. I look forward to building with y'all, like real talking. Look, if you ain't a member of the Phylaxis Society, I mean, I think you should just go on and just jump on in. If you're a Master Mason, go on and jump on in, and we look forward to building with y'all. And Brother Jackson, thanks again for the invitation. The Maarifa Chapter, I love y'all. Appreciate you all. Look forward to building with y'all in the very near future.
All right, thank you so much, and thank you all for being with us. We have a lot of dignitaries on the line.
Yes, we
and,
do.
I appreciate all of you taking time today to be among us and to help get a little bit more light. So again, have a great afternoon, great evening, and we look forward to having you join us next week. Thank you, Brother Menzise.
All right, thank you, bro. Take care, y'all.
Take care.